I'm in this field with my dogs. It's a bit windy, so I might get a bit, the sound may get distorted, never mind. And I'm thinking about the boundaries of the self, which I've spoken about before, and dualism, which I've spoken about before. And what I'm looking at here is that idea that comes up in Paul Bloom's lovely little book, Descartes' Baby, where he talks about the human condition essentially being one of dualism. He says we are natural born dualists, is the phrase he uses. And he cites quite a bit of research on that. That also appears in some work with children that I think Elizabeth Spelk carried out, and somebody called Béargion, I don't know the pronunciation, it's a French appearing name. But again, that's looking at the responses of children and their explanations of their experience, which again suggests that all scientific understanding to the contrary, we appear to be natural born dualists. We appear to get a sense of ourselves as having this slightly odd divided state in which we are in a material world with a body made of essentially the same stuff as the ground on which we walk, made of essentially the same stuff as the trees and the rocks and everything else. We have that, and then we have this sense that there is this kind of other self, which is characterized by things like agency and intentionality and awareness and psychology and those kind of terms really. Memory, imagination and so on. And as I say, whilst there's no scientific credibility for the reality of that dualism, that is appears to be part of our phenomenological inheritance. And I know there's a number of accounts for how that sense of two selves, or sense of two kinds of stuff would arise. I know Drew Leder and Mark Johnson actually have given pretty good accounts for how that experience of duality might arise from embodied experience through evolutionary accounts ultimately. And I know there's also accounts for how that sense of self might be eradicated, and you find those a lot in contemplative practices, spiritual practices, religious practices, which the ambition is to transcend or get over or to elide those two selves. But we seem to have this ability. As I think I've mentioned, it's probably got good evolutionary reasons for it. I would imagine that any animal that has a sense of self, that is able to not only cognize but also recognize itself in the world, probably has a better chance of survival, certainly in terms of being able to predict and control its environment, for example. Where am I going with this? Oh yeah, so given that we have these two senses of self, or the sense of a self which is immaterial, let's put it that way, there does seem to be a relationship between that sense of self, which is immaterial, and the material world, obviously. We are ghosts in the machine, we are embodied, our cognition is felt to be embodied. So there's a kind of mapping process in which the sense of self is mapped onto a certain location and extension of the material world. And the usual one, of course, is the physical body itself. Our sense of self seems to be mapped onto our physical self, our body in the world. Although it's not a one-to-one mapping, I suspect. There's no sense in which I feel myself to simply stop at the edge of my skin. I don't get a sense of that harsh boundary. And to the extent that there is a boundary at all, it does seem to be one that can vary. As again, I think I've mentioned before, certainly under times of stress, we pull those boundaries in and we identify with some part of ourselves which was within the body, to the extent that we're happy to, well, not happy, but we're prepared to lose limbs or prepared to prepared to sacrifice part of our material body in order to protect a self which may be perceived as being located within a particular area of that body. And sometimes we go the other way and we may extend out and feel ourselves to be partly inherent within wider parts of the material world than our body simply occupies, particularly loved ones, for example. And I think the word love is very important there, actually. I think it's probably an indicator of the process that I'm talking about. But also, not just loved ones, we sometimes identify, and I think mapping is to do with identification. We also identify with wider communities, sometimes with non-human entities. I do get a sense of that with my dogs quite easily. And sometimes with the wider ecology, if you like. And I know certainly there's some ideas within deep ecology that it would do the planet a lot of good if we were able to better identify with the ecology, or better set these nominal boundaries of oneself at a greater remove from one's own individual body and one's own selfish concerns, which again is probably true, notwithstanding the fact that we can pull those boundaries back whenever we're under threat. So where am I going with this? I think I've mentioned all that before in different contexts or in different fragments. I suppose what I'm interested in here is that, although I'm talking about boundaries of the self, and how I've heard that phrase, I was at a conference a couple of years ago by the British Psychological Society, in which the theme was the boundaries of the self. And certainly one of the things I would not be happy with in a description which used this general paradigm is one in which the boundary of the self is perceived as being a kind of boundary, a distinct moment of transition, a singular break in a smooth dimension which extends outwards from the body. That doesn't seem to be my experience of it at all, actually. As I say, I don't feel my sense of self, all those things to do with agency and intention and awareness and so on. I don't experience those as stopping at the edge of my body. I know my body stops there, but I just don't. That's not how I experience it. I suspect most other people don't experience it that way either. I'm reserving opinion on that because I know there is some evidence that certain forms of autism can give a sort of sense of that, but I certainly don't experience that. And I'm looking around this field, and I've got my dogs, a hedge, and there's grass, and the sky, and clouds, and so on. And I can kind of, when I look to my own intentionality and my own sense of agency, and I look out into the world, I'm not seeing a huge difference. The sense of those things being present seems to be as active within this dog and within this tree and within this grass as it is within me. It's not viewpointed like my own sense of presence and sense of self is. I have no viewpoint. The intentionality of the dog that I'm feeling from the dog is not viewpointed in the way that my own is. But I'm simply not getting a sense of there being a cut-off point where this is tomb world, the world of the dead out there, and all life is here. It's not like that at all for me, at least, and I'm sure it's not like that for other people. It seems to be much more multivalent, much more complex. The boundary is not clearly drawn. There's a kind of gradient of possibilities. I can certainly feel some things to be more intentionally aware and more, these are terrible terms, it sounds like I'm being completely panpsychic about this, but that sense of being in the world, how do I express that sense of being in the world that I'm experiencing does not stop at the boundaries of my skin. In fact, doesn't stop anywhere. It's a smooth gradient, and it's a multiple gradient, so it's a kind of lumpy. It's kind of lumpy, really. So hard to describe. Anyway, I hope that makes a sort of sense.